Very good afternoon to everyone in China and a good morning to those of you in the UK. My name is James Brodie and I'm the Regional Director for Scotland and Northern Ireland and the Energy Sector Lead for the China-Britain Business Council, the UK's national network promoting trade and investment with China. I've taken over moderating duties from Kevin Leo of our partners Scottish Development International for today's webinar. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the third session of our six-part UK-China offshore wind webinar series on behalf of the British Embassy in Beijing, Scottish Development International, and our WeChat media partner, Europe Offshore Wind. Our first session looked at cost reduction in offshore wind and the second on floating wind. We'll start today's session with a macro look at offshore wind's innovative role in the overall energy transition by Wood, which will be followed up by continuing the theme of hot topics in the sector with a focused look at green hydrogen by Logan Energy, with examples of the many opportunities for UK-China collaboration. In order to accommodate our multilingual audience, but with limited time, the first of today's presentations will be delivered in English and the second in Mandarin. The Q&A session will primarily be in English, but you can write questions in Chinese too if you prefer. I will now just say a few words in Mandarin to welcome our China-based participants. 各位海上风电行业的朋友们，大家好。 我是英中贸易协会的苏格兰及北爱尔兰地区总监 James Brodie， 中文名字叫鲍杰明。我也负责英中贸易协会的能源相关的业务。很高兴今天我代替苏格兰国际发展局的刘总主持我们举办的第3场英中海上 风电研讨会，我也代表英国驻华使馆和我们的卫星媒体伙伴欧洲海上风电，欢迎您参加这场线上会议。在我们正式开始之前，我想再次提醒各位，为了保持会议流程，您将全程被关上静音，同时请您不要打开电脑上的相机，以免影响网速。如果希望问问题，请使用系统界面上的聊天功能，我们会随时关注，并在问答环节时帮你提出。您可以打中文或英文都可以。在第1和第2 场线上会议中，我们关注了建设海上风电场的最新创新。今天我们要看整个地摊转型之中，海上风电可以扮演什么角色，也考虑氢能经济的重要性。因此，我们特地邀请全球工程顾问公司 Wood 以及一家专门规划和设计绿色氢能系统的陆根能源集团来为我们开启今天的讨论。接下来，我们由第1位专家 Alan Mortimer 发言。Now I would like to introduce our first speaker today from Wood, the Director of Innovation at Wood Clean Energy, Alan Mortimer.
Thank you, James. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to CBBC for the invitation to talk on offshore wind and the energy transition. Okay, so hopefully now you can see my slides. And just a little bit about Wood first of all. We are a large engineering and project services company, almost 60,000 staff, nearly all engineers, operating in more than 60 countries, $10 billion annual revenue, and over 160 years of experience. We have a global footprint, more than 400 offices worldwide, including, of course, offices in China. And offshore wind is a really busy area for us. We've been involved in over 100 offshore wind projects to date, over 50 gigawatts of capacity. That's included activities in some of the world's largest offshore wind farms, which I'll come back to. Also the world's first commercial floating wind farm. And in percentage terms, over 70% of Europe's offshore wind farms and 75% in the Asia Pacific area. So that experience has given us a good position in offshore wind. Offshore wind has excellent potential, in fact, huge potential to decarbonise global energy systems. It also can decarbonise offshore fossil fuel production activities with reduced cost of operations, reduced carbon, deferred decommissioning costs, and also repurposing skill sets and expertise from oil and gas to offshore wind, and that's been a fairly active area of ours. Importantly, it's not restricted by land use issues in the same way as onshore wind, and because of that, it's growing rapidly and has the potential to grow to huge scale. We see that in these projected curves, so the compound annual growth rate for offshore wind being over 10% for the next 10 years, and that's faster than onshore wind. So offshore wind's share of wind generally is increasing. Also interesting there, obviously, the dominance of China within Asia being by far the largest market. This is how we depict the offshore wind life cycle in 5 apparently discrete stages: develop, design, build, commission, and operate, each with their own requirements in terms of skill sets and resources and expertise. But actually a key message for us is that not to operate them in a discrete manner, because it's really important to have continuity of personnel, data and information right through all 5 of these stages, so that it runs as smoothly as possible, minimises risks, maximises efficiency, and also we get feedback from operations back into the early stages of develop and design. Measuring the wind is a key area for offshore wind, just as it is for onshore wind, because production is so sensitive to wind speeds. And so because of that, a lot of effort goes into measurements, and with both masts and with LiDAR as well used to gather that data. And then comes the clever bit, which is the analysis of that data in order to determine the resource and also the productivity or energy yield of the wind farms as accurately as possible. You see in the top left there the effect of wakes, and wakes reduce the productivity of turbines downstream, and that has to be accurately measured and modelled. If you look at the top right, then this is quite a topical issue for offshore wind at the moment: blockage effect, whereby large wind farms actually influence the wind flow upstream, and so that effect also has to be catered for in our analysis. And the bottom left there is layout optimization at the design stage, and that also is a very involved and complex exercise which considers many factors. But when it comes to maximising productivity, that then also has some trade-offs against things like infrastructure costs and cabling costs and so on. All of that has to be modelled accurately to get to the lowest cost of energy. And then if you look at the bottom right there, that shows some of our LiDAR measurements. So this is not a model, this is a measurement, and it's showing the wind flow behind a turbine and then impinging on the turbine downstream. And we've done a lot of work on how to do that as accurately as possible so that we can be confident in our energy yield predictions. LiDAR is an important technology for us because it gathers a lot of information across a wide area, which is particularly important for offshore wind. So we use scanning LiDAR here, which with a range of 4 kilometers basically gives you a hemisphere of data on wind flow characteristics up to a radius of 4 kilometers. And again, you're showing some of the scans which are used to validate our models. And LiDAR technology is becoming standard now in offshore wind because of that. not just for wind resource assessment, but also for power performance assessment. So that's confirming that the productivity of the turbine is what it should be for any given wind speed. Wake characterization, and also extreme shear measurements. So shear is the difference in wind speed between the top and bottom of the rotor. And it's not as simple as you might think offshore. We're finding conditions when it can be extreme, and that needs to be factored into the design of the plant. So the latest LiDAR technology is coming through now, and it's cheaper. It's 6 kilometres, meeting all the international standards. So it's readily deployable on either the transition piece at the bottom of the tower or on the nacelle at the top of the turbine in order to give that sort of information. So LiDAR, we think, has got an important part to play for offshore wind. I know you've had a separate discussion on floating, so I've just got a summary here on floating from our perspective, but clearly a wide range of floating technologies under development at the moment, and there are key challenges still to be overcome, key one being cost reduction to get to parity with fixed wind, and some parties now believe that will be achieved by around 2030 because costs are coming down. Scale up to larger turbines. With the bigger turbines, the cost differential reduces between floating wind and fixed wind. Platform and moorings development, and the platform being by far the biggest area of potential for cost reduction. So a lot of work getting underway now on that, but it's still to deliver results in terms of getting platforms down to the costs that they need to be, and installation and repair logistics obviously as well. But a couple of points for floating. The next generation projects are still going to require some funding support to get going, and secondly, localization of the supply chain is key to political support. So we need to see, for example, the floaters being made at local facilities, whilst also getting the benefits of volume manufacture. Floater platform categories can be split into 3 basic ones really. The spar platform, which is really a huge counterweight to stabilize motions, and then the floater platforms, the traditional, if you like, floating platform, which rides the waves, and then tension leg platform, where you've got very strong positive buoyancy acting against anchors, and then the moorings are under tension to help stabilize the platform. And it's not clear yet which, if any, of these are going to dominate the market in the longer term, so all of them are being investigated. A couple of examples of floating developments we've been involved in: the Highwind Scotland, so first commercial floating wind project in the world, and Scotland's showing a lot of potential for floating wind through the current leasing round as well. And so we see floating wind taking an increasing share of offshore wind generally, and potentially even matching fixed wind in the longer term. But also in relation to oil and gas, so we're working on the Highwind Tampen project. So this is on electrification of oil and gas platforms, tying them into floating wind turbines, and that power then being used to decarbonise the operations of the platforms. That's really a great flagship project, and we see more applications of this type to help decarbonise oil and gas offshore operations. Innovation is really important in offshore wind, and that's because it's continuing to push the technical boundaries. And we work a lot with the Offshore Renewable Energy Catapult, which is a UK government-funded organisation, all about innovation to drive down the costs of offshore wind. So we operate the 7 megawatt turbine there with the Catapult for research purposes. We're involved in integrity management development work, and some of that is bringing in relevant experience from oil and gas, where we have platforms that have been operating offshore for 40 years or more, so that's valuable knowledge. Digital twinning to reduce costs of operations, LiDAR technology test and development, load measurement drone surveys as well, and operational optimization. And so we see all these areas adding up to considerable potential for further reduction of costs of offshore wind. Just briefly, some project profiles. So here's one we're involved in the UK. It's an extension of an existing offshore wind farm. The extension itself is up to 1.2 gigawatts, so very large. And there we're working on the consents and regulatory issues. Hornsea 1, which is another one at 1.2 gigawatts. produced operating wind farm, and there we've advised an investor in the project. Vineyard in the USA, which is one of the preeminent projects off the East Coast there, where we've been working with the developer. So just a snapshot, really. And moving on to green hydrogen. Now, Yushuan is going to talk in more detail about green hydrogen, so I'll talk only at a high level, and specifically in relation to offshore wind. But if we look at the hydrogen market globally, hydrogen is already a big player industrially, and about a third of it is used for oil refining, a third for ammonia production, for fertilizers and explosives, and the rest of it split between iron, methanol, ethylene production and so on. But almost all of that is so-called grey hydrogen, so there's no capture of emissions. The emissions go to atmosphere, carbon emissions. But what we're looking at in future is a likely tenfold increase in demand for hydrogen, with all of that new application being for clean hydrogen. So that's without the carbon emissions. And so that being used for transport and industry and heating. And this is our own basic depiction of the likely future hydrogen economy and our system. And so we've got production on the left-hand side there, either green hydrogen, which is produced through renewable electricity and electrolysis, or blue hydrogen, which is produced through steam methane reforming of natural gas, or indeed biofeedstocks as well. That then being transported and distributed and at times stored as well for multiple uses in transport, heat, power, and industry as well. And it's a bit like power. It's the agglomeration of all of these uses together through a network which gets to scale and then gets costs down. And that's what's required for hydrogen. And we do now believe that that is going to happen. In fact, some parties believe that we will see a quarter of global decarbonisation being achieved through the use of hydrogen, as opposed to pure electrification. Hydrogen, although it's an energy vector, it does also come with storage capability, and because of its high energy content, even potentially up to seasonal timeframes of where hydrogen is stored underground. So all of that currently being worked on, and we see again costs coming down and the storage applications of hydrogen becoming important. When we look at green hydrogen produced through electrolysis, one important factor is that costs are coming down rapidly. So we're at the start of the cost reduction curve, and we do see that by 2030 we could have costs that are competitive with conventional sources of hydrogen. So it's a dynamic situation. We need to factor that into any projects that we're involved in. And when considering coupling hydrogen production with offshore wind, there are some challenges, and there's a lot of discussion around where that hydrogen production should be done. But suffice it to say that combining electricity with salt water and corrosive materials and motions and remote access means these are potentially quite significant challenges, but they are starting now to be addressed through various leading pilot projects. You can see there in the right-hand column. But at the moment, I think fair to say that the safest bet and some of the earliest projects we're looking at will produce the hydrogen onshore, with the power coming ashore from cables. So offshore wind powering onshore hydrogen generation, and that hydrogen then being used locally either to go into the gas network or for industry. So that's what we're seeing at the moment. The bulk transport of hydrogen is also going to be really critical to its ultimate success, and like with liquid natural gas, it's got to be easily transportable. So we are now seeing liquefied hydrogen tankers starting to emerge, like in that picture. We're also seeing large-scale hydrogen networks being proposed, such as this one for Europe, so pipelines. And we're seeing hydrogen in the form of ammonia being touted as a means of transporting the energy around, and also as green methanol as well. And we're likely to see different solutions for different applications, but the important point is that it needs to be readily transportable around the world to get an effective market going. Just some profiles of projects we've been involved in. So this one was actually hydrogen for fuel. for ferries in Scotland, and that looked at the costs of converting these ferries to hydrogen as opposed to conventional marine fuels. And I found actually that the cost gap wasn't huge, and we see with costs coming down, that could well close in time, and we could see fully cost-effective applications for hydrogen in that way. This one I thought I would show because it's bigger scale and it's industrial, and so this is actually combining Humber Zero is a project in the east coast of England, and it's combining blue hydrogen production with green hydrogen from offshore wind to decarbonise operations at 2 refineries and a gas-fired power plant. And that's showing a lot of promise there, but interesting to us because it's getting to scale and getting costs down. So that finishes my slides. Thanks very much for your attention, and I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. That was a whirlwind tour of some really exciting areas of innovation in offshore wind and the work that Wood's been involved with. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session in about 20 minutes when we can ask you to go into some more detail on some of that. And the second half of your presentation there focused more on hydrogen and the various forms of hydrogen. Our next speaker from Logan Energy, Zhang Yuxuan, will focus on green hydrogen, and I'll hand over to Yuxuan now. If Yuxuan could share his screen, he's going to take us on a more detailed look at UK-China partnership in green hydrogen. Over to you.
Thanks, James.感谢苏格兰国际发展局和英中贸易协会的邀请。女士们、先生们，大家下午好。我是来自 Logan Energy 洛根能源的张宇璇。我今天演讲的主题是中英携手发展绿色氢能。首先，我介绍一下洛根能源的发展经历。洛根能源有限公司2005年在英国注册，2008年英国能源市场的6大之一苏格兰和南方能源集团 SSE 与苏格兰企业局成为股东。2016年前 SSE 集团 CEO 的控股公司 Denham 能源收购了 SSE 的股份。2008年，我们在荷兰设立了子公司，用于欧盟业务。2019年，洛根引入了来自河南蓝星电力机械有限公司的战略投资，在今年将正式进入中国市场。Logan Energy 是欧洲领先的氢气和燃油电池能源技术公司。我们在提供综合能源系统解决方案、能源中心设计和储能系统方面积累了近30年的经验，主导完成了多项高价值示范工程。我们提供能源解决方案的交钥匙服务，包括综合能源管理、多能互补系统，如能源中心和储能系统的搭建。氢能系统和燃油电池整体集成、制氢、供氢和加氢站建设、核心产品开发以及为政府提供氢能政策顾问服务。我们在整个氢气的价值链上，包括制氢、纯化、压缩、储存、运输、加氢以及燃油电池技术上，都能够提供全套的系统设计和集成技术服务。我们从事设计、集成和生产，同时也对项目进行工程管理和持续支持。下面是我们在细分领域的一些重点项目。首先是燃油电池和冷热电3联产系统。Logan Energy 在英国已安装交付超过了1兆瓦的燃油电池3联产系统。其中一个典型案例是2012年为皇家财产局在伦敦摄政街综合体提供的燃油电池3联产系统。这套系统由300千瓦熔融碳酸盐燃油电池，使用管道天然气为综合体中超过46000平的物业提供能源。 这套系统是当年全欧洲最大和效率最高的3联产系统。在可行性研究方面，我们也参与了欧盟地平线2020中的 HYSYS 1期和2期中燃料电池船动力系统和基建的设计，以及 HYSYS 3期岸基能源系统和储氢加氢的基建设计。然后这是一系列关于电解、储能、加氢、运氢的项目，我会在后面对典型的项目做介绍。绿色氢气的发展潜力，我们现在是根据氢气的来源，把它分为不同的颜色，黑色、棕色、灰色分别对应煤、褐煤、天然气制氢，蓝色是采用碳捕捉利用封存技术的化石燃料制氢，绿色是可再生能源制氢。全球当前纯氢气的产量每年约7000万吨，主要应用于炼油、合成氨、甲醇和钢铁。这些产能中，约76%是天然气制氢，23%是煤制氢，只有不足1%是电解制氢。这其中超过6900万吨的化石燃料制氢中，只有不足1%采用了碳捕捉技术。在现有的氢气产能中，提高绿色氢气占比的空间就是很大的。然后我们一直说氢是二次能源，其实氢和电的作用相似，都是由各种能源和技术生产出来的。氢作为化学能载体是电能的灵活补充，因为氢可以稳定的长期储存和运输，电能转化为氢能可以调节能源供需关系，有助于保障可再生能源的发展。化石能源占能源终端用户需求的4/5，氢能源的优势在于它的应用与传统化石能源相似，因此能帮助使用低碳电力难以减排的行业深度减排，比如交通、钢铁、化工生产、工业用热、城市供暖或电网外的建筑供暖。我们可以畅想，在未来的能源体系中，绿色氢气就是新的石油和天然气。这里我引用一个彭博的测算，左图呢是英国全年风光发电量最高的一周发电和用户的曲线。我们可以看到，在17年有17年是新能源可再生能源发电比例占18%，然后30年是占40%，40年50%，然后一直到100%。在17年有14吉瓦的机电连续运行，基本上无弃电。然后到30年，可再生电力占40%时，全年将有数周风光发电占用电需求的75%以上，期间每天都有发电超过需求的时段。到40年占50%时，在风光发电最高的一周，依然需要其他发电形式做补充，而且会出现9%的风光弃电。到100%时，在短时间内仍然需要其他发电形式。如果没有储能跟上的话，40%的可再生电力会被弃掉。那么我们定下的实现零碳排的一个目标是可再生电力为用户需求的400%。这意味着未来电力系统对于灵活性的需求是巨大的，但是现有的电池和用户侧灵活性技术无法实现以周、月或季节为单位的储能。电池是不能安全经济的扩容到季节性储能规模，而用户侧的需求不能被长时间推迟。那么电制器或者是氢储能可能是未来实现经济型季节储能的技术。因为这个系列的第5场是储能专题，所以我就不多展开了。这里可以介绍的是，氢储能的功率成本高，能量成本低；电池的功率成本低，能量成本高，因此氢适用于大容量储能时更有经济性。氢的另一个特点是能够让可再生电力进行行业迁移，也就是电制 X 这个概念啊。可再生电力通过电解制氢以后，可以用于交通、工业和热电。那么这张图就是我们设计的可再生能源与氢能耦合的能源系统。 这个利用风能、太阳能、潮汐能，通过电解制氢用于车船燃料，和燃油电池的热电联供。Livermouth 社区能源项目就是我们对于这方面的探索。这个项目于2016年启动，用于示范氢能支撑的可离网型风光氢燃料电池互联系统设计，然后氢储能系统、综合能源管理系统和可再生能源平衡系统。图中箭头所指的建筑都是由氢储能系统供电。微网系统的电力来源于750千瓦的风机和160千瓦的光伏。储能系统控制一套250千瓦的质子交换膜电解槽，利用余电制氢。在风光供电不足时，控制一套100千瓦质子交换膜燃料电池为微网系统供电。项目还有2座分别使用质子交换膜电解和碱性电解槽的制氢加氢站，为17辆氢能燃料电池车供气。项目还包括了氢气系统的核心部件检测。以下是项目的能源中心和加氢站的实景图。Livermouth 项目也被澳大利亚的维多利亚州选作氢能战略的典型案例。接下来这个是西班牙特内里费岛，是欧洲的度假胜地。当地呢在寻求利用可再生能源制氢用于交通。我们呢为他们提供了模块化的海水电解制氢加氢站。这套设备每天能处理125立方的海水，然后制氢能力是5公斤每天，提供35兆帕的加氢，是在苏格兰设计制造调试后在特内里费岛安装运行。接下来是德国的 ISIS 研究中心提供的利用氢气跨季度储存太阳能用于交通的应用。我们提供了全套的解决方案，其中包括了2种电解和70兆帕的加氢站。在去年的古德伍德赛车嘉年华上，我们与 GeoPura 和西门子合作，为赛会提供了100千瓦的质子交换膜燃料电池与电池混合系统，用于供新能源汽车离网充电。整个活动使用氯氢替代柴油发电，实现了赛会的零碳用电。这是我们在北爱尔兰的欧盟 GenCom 项目这个项目是示范风电制氢用于交通。这是一个20兆瓦的风电场，安装0.5到1兆瓦的电解。我们提供并运营维护3辆氢气拖车，安装压缩和灌装设备。然后利用 GenCom 项目产生的绿色氢气，为贝尔法斯特市区的双层氢能巴士供氢。我们建设一座35兆帕的加氢站，利用低温快速充装技术，为3辆双层氢能巴士实现连续加氢，加氢能力是每天100公斤。Logan Energy 参与了整个项目中从电解槽到加氢舱的所有步骤。接下来这个是荷兰的海本轻谷项目，这是今年启动的。该项目由欧洲燃油电池和氢能联合组织发起，总投资额9000万欧元。目标在一个项目中建设氢气的全价值链，包括大规模可再生能源制氢用于工业原料、储能和交通，示范氢能在工业、建筑和交通领域的应用。我们为项目提供数据中心、燃油电池供电系统、港口燃油电池供电系统和设计制造驳船加氢站。在未来的30年，氢能在交通燃料、建筑热电、工业用电、工业用料和发电领域都有巨大的发展潜力，并且各国都在制定加速政策。绿色氢气作为能源，能够保障价格和供应。我们看这个图的话， 是全球的 LNG 主要的海运路线。我们可以看到，最繁忙的路线都集中在印太地区和中国南海。然后下图呢，是我们中国对于原油的进口依赖度逐年一直增长。也就是说，发展绿色氢气作为能源使用，是有助于保障我国的能源安全的。然后另外是在电价机制确定的情况下，电解质氢气的价格是可以做到稳定的。那这样的话就可以避免像天然气和国际原油在过去几年这样剧烈的价格波动。近年来今年国际能源署和国际货币基金组织制定的疫情后可持续复苏计划中提出了3项重要的政策建议。一是推动可再生能源建设，尤其是风能和太阳能；二是加快提高能源效率，尤其是建筑升级；三是推进电网的扩展和现代化。氢能在这3个领域都将起到重要的作用。国际能源署的署长也提出，在接下来的关键技术中，重点关注的都是电解质氢和电池技术。那么欧盟在7月份公布的新氢能路线图中，图和刺激计划里明确设定了分3个阶段加速发展规模化经济至绿色氢气的策略。英国的商业、能源和产业战略部也将发布氢能战略，用于支持氢能产业列入新冠经济刺激计划。就中国发展氢能的可能性，短期内中国具有发展大规模集中煤制氢加碳捕捉利用封存技术的优势。中长期看，中国是具有发展大规模可再生能源电解质氢的潜力。今年我们中国的部分地区已经能够将氢气的电解质氢成本做到趋近于2美元每公斤。国内呢也已经有内陆地区如新疆、青海进行规模制氢的案例。尽管制氢成本比较低，但是当地没有用户，运氢的成本又高，因此没有发展起来。中国的用氢产业主要分布在沿海地区，因此呢，海上风电制氢会更匹配现有的产业分布。在中英合作发展绿氢的前景，中国发展氢能的优势是，中国具有全球最大的制氢产能和巨大的可再生能源可开发量，产业链集中，降成本能力强，工业应用场景丰富。而中国面临的挑战是，在核心材料、零部件、装备和工程方面有不少关键的技术问题。政策设计和法律法规尚不完善，商业模式模糊。而英国具有的优势是，英国有丰富的可再生能源技术、材料技术积累和核心装备开发的经验。英国也正在进行能源转型，促进油气产业转型升级。而英国的劣势是降成本能力差，应用场景少。因此，中国和英国在发展氢能产业上有互补性，具有良好的产业合作契机。蓝星和洛根在中国的合资公司将结合双方的优势，在中国寻找氢能更广泛的应用场景和战略合作，为洛根能源在新能源领域的技术寻找更大的市场，优化国际供应链，进行关键部件的开发和制造，规模化降成本，然后拓展上下游产业企业的各种形式合作。合资公司将作为国际服务的亚洲枢纽，实现技术产品本地化服务。感谢您观看。
Thank you, Yushin. That was an excellent look into the work that you've been doing to bring together Scotland and China in the opportunities around the green hydrogen, and also all of Logan Energy's business in other parts of Europe as well. I'd like to invite back our first speaker, Alan Mortimer, to join me on a panel discussion now, where we can invite more questions and answers from our participants. So Alan, if you'd like to turn your video back on, thank you. And the first question that's come through from our audience, I'd like to first direct at you, Alan, and it's about the prospect of getting green hydrogen from seawater, and whether or not that would involve desalination, and if so, because do you require fresh water in order to produce hydrogen from seawater, essentially? So is desalination necessary, and if so, what does that mean in terms of cost? And Yushin, if you want to come in after Alan on that too, then feel free.
Yeah, fine. I'll give you my perspective, and Yushin probably will have more to say on it. But to date, the electrolyzers have required a very high purity fresh water. So a desalination plant would be required offshore. But the proviso to that is that we have recently seen some electrolyzer manufacturers claiming to be able to use seawater directly. Now, we haven't investigated that yet, and I believe there's more work to do to develop that technology. But if it can be done, then it could certainly address one of the challenges of offshore hydrogen production. So, Yushuan, would you want to add to that?
Yes. Probably I will just answer in Mandarin. And 海水电解制氢是一定要用淡水的。比如说我们做的这个 CFUEL 项目，它就是探索的就是以海水直接制氢，但是这里边是要集成有淡化系统。那么这个成本的话，主要是用电成本。我们这个项目交付以后，会逐步把这个经济性算出来。但是这个整个在整个电解制氢中，压缩和淡化的用电成本是在整个系统里边成本应该是占比很小的，主要还是用电成
本。Okay, thank you for the answer. So it sounds like there is some advances being made there too. Certainly a space to probably watch. The next question, which I'll put to you, Alan, again, is, does the LiDAR technology that you talked about in your presentation, is that Wood's own technology, or are you coordinating proprietary technology of other firms on that front, analysing it?
We do have our own LiDAR technology. It's quite unusual for a services company like ourselves to have our own technology, but because measuring the wind is so important, we decided this is an area where we need to have our own technology, and so we have developed that and developed the next generation that we think will be a big step forward. That said, when we do analysis of data, we will use data from any of the LiDAR technologies that are available on the market, but we have seen advantages in developing and using our own technology because, as I say, it's so important to fully utilize the capabilities of LiDAR.
And on a kind of similar note, Yushin, there's a question wanting to understand what your role is in projects like the Leavenmouth project that you mentioned as an example. Are you an EPC contractor for projects like that, or what role does Logan Energy play?
Yes, Logan Energy plays not EPC, but we are managing the whole hydrogen system. So, and Log Energy is not very heavy technology weighted company. So we don't develop those electrolyzer or fuel cell, but we do all the integration and the system design around them and balance of plant design. So Livermouth initially was taken from Great Bright Hydrogen. They are but we manage the whole hydrogen project, but not the wind and the solar.
Okay, and Alan, is that a role that would also sometimes perform?
Yeah, I mean, our position in hydrogen is still evolving, but we would see a role to be a system integrator, so pulling together components and then providing the assurance and resources required to support the build of projects. So that's probably going to be our role in hydrogen, potentially supporting operations as well in the same way that we do with our existing activities. So we see that as being the likely role for us in hydrogen. Infrastructure is obviously going to be key too. So building out the pipeline and whether it's liquefaction or ammonia or whatever, but the infrastructure required for all of that to move hydrogen around. That's all fertile ground, I would see, for companies like ourselves to get into and to support.
Alan, would you be able to speak a bit more about the connecting offshore wind to power the high wind Tampen? There's also, there's a lot of strong Chinese interest in powering offshore oil and gas activities with wind. So it'd be interesting to know where we're at with that as a prospect.
Yeah, well, there we actually do have an EPC role, and that is to provide the equipment. I mean, we performed the sort of feasibility and feed work for Equinor, but now providing the equipment to electrify the platforms. So at the moment, they're using fossil fuel plant to generate the power that's used on the platform. That's obviously being displaced by the power from the floating wind turbines. Not entirely, because obviously periods of low wind, then fossil fuel is still used. But overall, there's still a very significant reduction in the amount of fossil fuel that's required, and therefore decarbonising of operations. So we're involved in all of the equipment and modifications around that on the platforms, and also the cabling to the turbines, and modifications to the control systems of the turbines as well.
And during your presentation, there was a slide which talked about the difficulty of offshore hydrogen storage versus onshore hydrogen storage, and the fact that we were currently, it was easier to and more realistic in the near term to focus on this onshore hydrogen facilities. Do you and you soon have an idea of when in the future we might see the ease of offshore facilities, hydrogen facilities, being also feasible? It looked, there was lots of yellow and red in that table for anything that wasn't onshore.
Yeah.
I don't have the slide up, but would you be able to put a time frame on how fast we're able to decrease the challenges there?
Yeah. The yellows and reds were based on current knowledge and current TRL levels, so the status of the technology, and clearly it's evolving. So these pilot projects are starting to try to address these issues. All I would say is that some of them are quite fundamental, so I think there will be big challenges, and it may be when we get to large scale which justifies the investment of, for example, good solid platforms or even offshore islands being talked about as well for production of hydrogen as opposed to production of power to be sent ashore on cables. Then it may come into its own. But there's quite a lot of research and development work still to be done, which is why I'm a little bit cautious about offshore production for the next 10 years anyway, I would say. But let's see how these pilot projects go.
Yushin, would you like to come in on that?
So for the hydrogen supply chain itself, is getting to a, yeah, as Alan said, is coming to the start of the cost reduction cycle. So from our point of view, for hydrogen, technology is not the critical thing. Most of that is demand. So if that's the commercialized and the large scale production are promoted, then we can see this will be accelerated. And the European Union's roadmap has stepped different phases from now to 2050. And the first stage is large scale, including 6 gigawatts electrolyzer installation to produce over 1 million hydrogen in Europe. And they foresee this will accelerate the whole process. But I'm not sure if that's including the offshore wind. For the technology point of view, is also how where do we produce the hydrogen? Do we produce offshore or onshore? That's lead to different technical road for the development. So we are keen to have some demonstration projects to to work with Chinese partners to develop this and study the feasibility and to kind of accelerate. But hydrogen is not a new technology itself, so it's very demand driven.
Okay. Yushin, you showed a map of the European plans for transportation of liquefied hydrogen during your presentation. There's a question which asks about what the standard method of transportation is for hydrogen. Is it compressed gas or is it liquefied?
So traditionally it's compressed in tank storage or liquefied. And recently there'll be also as metal storage. And so liquefied hydrogen is mostly used in the aerospace area. In normal business, its cost is very high and very unstable. So it's only American using a lot of liquefied hydrogen. And in the energy sector, most of current technology is using compressed air, so a compressed hydrogen storage. And normally we use 200 bar, 350 bar, and 750 bar for, even 900 bar for very big, different cases. So for now, still compressed tank storage.
Okay. And an extension to that question, the Chinese government has placed a great deal of emphasis in building the infrastructure around liquefied natural gas over the last few years and the whole supply chain there. What's the advantage that hydrogen has in terms of return on investment, in your opinion?
So currently, if we have done some study with renewable energy producing hydrogen, and in China, particularly in China, hydrogen produced from natural gas are not, in the near future won't have any advantage on renewable hydrogens, green hydrogens. The only issue is the production of green hydrogen is not stable as natural gas, but the supply of natural gas is very volatile. So If we remember 2018, the huge spike in natural gas price in China, and hydrogen, because hydrogen are produced locally and used locally, it doesn't include transportation from from Norwegian, from Mid East. So that's some hidden cost in LNG. But directly speaking, producing hydrogen from electrolyzer is approaching to the cost of natural gas. So in the near future, maybe 5 years, they will at the same stage of cost. So
yeah, I think Alan had mentioned 2030 as a date where they saw green hydrogen coming down to the same price as conventionally produced hydrogen. Is that right?
Yeah. So green hydrogen, currently a big portion of the cost is the installation, the equipment, and natural gas, blue hydrogen. The biggest portion is the price of the natural gas. So, and using natural gas itself as an energy is also including, it's approaching to that. So with the cost reduction on the co-equipment in hydrogen system, the cost of hydrogen and the natural gas will meet at some point, and we think this is accelerating.
We've got another question which, Alan, you might like to pick up. It's again around floating wind in conjunction with hydrogen. Would you like to share your insight on the future of that prospect and any technological challenges? I know that Yushun said it's not technology, it's more about demand, but I don't know if you did talk about certain technical things that need to be overcome. What's your vision of the future?
Yeah, certainly. And some very large floating wind projects being proposed now around the world. And typically they're quite a long distance offshore. So the cost of a power cable connection becomes larger. And potentially that starts to swing things in favour of hydrogen. So that's the positive, if you like. The negative is obviously to operate electrolyser plants so far offshore is going to be more expensive than having it onshore. And also, what do you put it on, especially if you're in deep water? Do you put it on a platform, maybe on one of the turbine platforms? As far as you have space for, and you may need to split it across a number of platforms. So all of that adds to the cost as well. But it hasn't yet been properly bottomed out. But I would think in the long term, we will see hydrogen having a big role coupled with floating wind, just because of that remoteness issue. And to transport, in energy terms, to transport hydrogen through pipelines is cheaper than transporting power through cables. Okay, you have the conversion loss in the electrolyser, but aside from that, it's cheaper to transport energy longer distances. So I think we will see that featuring more and more in future.
Would you like to add anything to that, Yushun?
Yeah, Alan has covered, all the points. Yeah.
Another question for you, Yushun, is related to standards, which we haven't talked about. This is you mentioned the technology is old, and the use of hydrogen has been around a long time, but as the use of hydrogen in conjunction with renewable energy sources is much more recent. Have there been a set of standards developed for that usage, or is it easy to apply the existing standards that have been in use in the petrochemical sector for many years?
So yes, hydrogen itself has been, people has been using industrialized for many years. The new technology here is the electrolyzer and PEM, especially the PEM electrolyzer, solid oxide electrolyzer, and the fuel cell representative. So the hydrogen safety standards in China is one of the biggest challenge, because everyone is worried about the safety. And in fact, hydrogen is not that bad. People are very familiar with hydrogen, but to be using hydrogen as a natural gas level with that similar safety regulation is not yet clearly defined in China. So that means hydrogen is not able to go to the community at the moment, and it has to follow very strict safety regulations when you produce and transport and use hydrogen. So that's something a lot of people, scholars, industries are pushing the government to do the new regulations to fitting hydrogen as a energy aspect rather than chemical production,
right,
in China. So yeah, there's a lot of movement doing that. But in UK now it's just a little tighter than natural gas, but you need to build firewalls, you need ATEX zones, but it can go to the community without any issue.
Maybe that's something we need our friends on this webinar who work in policy development with state-owned enterprises, etc., to help push forward that conversation in China as well, and maybe with the support of our friends in the British Embassy and SDI as well. So no, that's an interesting question. Another question there is just looking, and I'm conscious that we've maybe only got time for one or two more questions. There's an ask for a specific example of where Logan Energy in China, you talked about setting up a JV. Have you got specific examples of how you could leverage those advantages that China has in its industrial capacity and the UK in its in the hydrogen economy?
Yes. So we are currently developing several projects in China, and but from very briefly speaking, so just combine the UK and China's supply chain, we just constantly easily get over 30% of cost reduction, which has make a lot of business model become reliable. Also this currently in China, as I said, the safety regulation, the design is, so people has been mainly focusing on the components development in recent, like fuel cell, electrolyzer, but the system integration is a huge gap in this. That's why some new national level research topics has been looking and encouraging the system integration, and that's what we found. So we, as I said, the cost of hydrogen, the biggest portion now is the equipment cost. And with the system integration expertise and experience from Logan Energy, we can reduce that significantly. So, but still we need to develop business model and also technology development with the system to deliver a successful project in China. So mainly now it's demonstration, but this demonstration project, we can see this will be scaling up like Livermouth. It can be scale up easily to 10 megawatts level with all the system technologies.
And to take that question on, demonstration project level up to commercial industrial scale, Alan, have you got any insight on when we can expect to see, mass deployment of this technology at an industrial scale? This will be the final question. I think
Okay, I'll keep it brief then. I think industrial scale you would say is maybe 100 megawatts or more. And we now have in the UK anyway, the UK government saying they plan to support projects of 100 megawatts and more through the CFD mechanism. And we see similar moves in the likes of Germany and France and so on. So undoubtedly this is now starting to happen. So I think we will see within the next 5 years, we will see industrial scale applications of green hydrogen, albeit with a little bit of government support to get them going, but we will see them in the ground in that time frame, I think.
That's great. Thank you both for your time and expertise this morning in helping us look at green hydrogen and the role of offshore wind in the energy transition. So for any guests who are interested in the hydrogen economy, we're going to have another webinar later this week on Thursday, which will be looking at more blue hydrogen than green hydrogen. It will take place during SIPI in Shanghai, and the details are up on your screens there. So it will be in English and Chinese interpreted, so please feel free to join that. We have a host of experts more from the oil and gas world speaking on that in collaboration with the Department for International Trade and the British Embassy in Beijing as well. So it just leaves me really to thank you all again for taking part in today's meeting. We've got 3 more meetings coming up through until in November, 1 a month. We'll keep you up to date on these meetings via email as well as on our various WeChat accounts. If you would like a copy of today's presentation slides, please contact my colleagues Jiawei or Anna. Their emails are listed there on the slide. And if you would like to discuss potential collaboration with either of our speakers, Wood or Logan Energy, or indeed any other Scottish or UK companies on offshore wind projects, please contact me or our partners at SDI, Ian Ross and Helen Chun, energy sector leads there, whose emails are also listed on this slide. That's all from us for now. I hope to see you again at the next hydrogen webinar this Thursday. Take care and enjoy Chinese Valentine's Day. 谢谢节快乐